At more than 35 Australian embassies across the world, Extinction Rebellion protesters are demanding climate action. Slamming the Morrison government, they say they won't stop until they see real change.
Today, we're coming together in front of the Australian Embassy because we can't be indifferent to what's happening there.
The Australian government is doing nothing to combat climate change.
They have no genuine, effective, compassionate response to what is happening worldwide. It's beyond shocking.
Their fear and anger fueled by wall-to-wall coverage of our crisis.
More heartbreaking images coming out of Australia.
In one of the biggest fire disasters Australia has seen.
Australia's capital city has been shrouded in smoke.
Making international headlines for all the wrong reasons.
Australia burns as government resists calls for climate action.
How long will Australia be livable?
Australia fires. PM admits mistakes in handling of crisis.
As Australia burns, its leaders are clinging to coal.
Scott Morrison, the Daggy Dad, burned by Australia's fire crisis.
Scott Morrison thought the right response to these fires was to go and lie on a beach in Hawaii.
Mr Morrison's deputy said of arguments linking these bushfires to climate change that they were the ravings of some pure, enlightened and woke capital city greenies. And he's still the Deputy Prime Minister.
A government that continues to have what's accused of, being this kind of incestuous relationship with the fossil fuel industry.
Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
I mean, I can't tell you how many coal trains I have seen.
Stand down now. Tell the Prime Minister to go and get...
The bad PR could be getting to our PM. Scott Morrison promising to evolve Australia's climate policies.
Our government's plan is to meet and beat our emissions reductions targets.
But what does that mean in the eyes of the world?
Damien Cave is the New York Times bureau chief in Australia and he joins us now. So Damien, what do you think it is about these fires in Australia that has captured the world's attention?
Well, I think there are a lot of factors. I mean, one is just the sheer scale of this. I mean, I was running the numbers, and the fires have burned an area that's bigger than the fires from the Amazon, California, Indonesia, all combined. So I think that's part of it. I also think it's the sheer vision of people on the beach being dragged away from their holiday vacations. This is a wealthy country that's dealing with a climate-induced crisis. It's not some small, remote island. It's a place that it should be able to deal with this, and yet it's still overwhelmed by what's happening. So I think that's another factor. And then I think the third factor is actually this sort of ecological damage, especially in relation to nature and the animals. This is a place that just has animals unlike anywhere else. And for the world to see, kangaroos jumping through the flames and koalas being burned, I think it's just really stirring up a whole lot of emotions and a whole lot of sadness.
Damien, there's talk of the fires, of course, with talk of climate change. How are we seen in Australia by the rest of the world in that regard?
I think the world sees Australia as a victim of inaction on climate change, both within Australia and around the world. I mean, this is a country that for years has known that it was especially vulnerable to climate change, and yet the government here has resisted doing something really aggressive for a while. And so I think the world is looking at this with kind of scratching its head and saying, well, why is this place that's known to be vulnerable, where scientists have been predicting this kind of thing for years, still so resistant to really tackling this and being a leader on this issue? So I think the world is really asking itself, why is it so hard for Australia to get its head around this?
Damien, Time magazine has just published an op-ed from our former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, slamming our current Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. How's that going to go down?
I think that he's saying what a lot of people outside of Australia are saying is, why is this still so difficult to manage? I mean, I've worked in a lot of different countries. There are a lot of countries in the world where climate change, as Malcolm said, is just as accepted as gravity. There are a handful of countries where that's not. Australia is one. The United States is another. And it just means it's really hard to actually deal with the consequences of it when you're still debating whether or not it's really happening. So, I think that that's just going to stir up the debate and the division here in Australia that's been going on for a very long time. But who knows if it's going to lead to a resolution? It doesn't look like that's anytime soon.
Damien, do you get the sense that what's happening here is actually having an influence on people in the rest of the world taking action on climate change?
I think it's a wake-up call for the whole world. I think there are a lot of people who are looking at Australia and saying, gosh, is what's happening there going to come to me where I live? And so, it is to some degree the canary in the coal mine. And while there are lots of people who have been mobilized around climate change for a long time, I think it's shifting the debate a bit. I think it's making people realize that, the impacts of climate change are not so far in the future, and they're not, relegated to places that are places you might not have ever gone for vacation. I mean, this is a place, a country that the world really loves and loves to visit. And so to see it really suffering through these fires, I do think it's changing minds all over the world.
The sad thing is it looks like we're an experiment that's failed. Damien, we really appreciate your time this evening.
Sure, thank you.